Hey, read through the word. Today is November 9th, and today's lesson is called Scattered. Okay, here we are in the book of Acts, and as always, I love the book of Acts. I mean, I love every book of the Bible. So, my students in one of my classes today were picking on me about, you just love every book of the Bible, Miss Nance. And they said, they said Romans. Romans is your favorite book. And they said, but James is your favorite book. And they're like, oh, but you really like Habakkuk. I said, okay, so here we go. I said, how about we'll do Genesis as my favorite of the books of Moses. Habakkuk is my favorite minor prophet. Isaiah is my favorite major prophet. Matthew is my favorite gospel. Romans is my favorite Pauline epistle. James is my favorite general epistle. But then, it's like asking a favorite child. You can't. They're all in Acts is so much. There is so much. Now, I know we've talked about this before, that, when you talk Old Testament, you get all the way through the book of Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, and then when you start into the wisdom books and the major prophets and the minor prophets, all of those books fit inside your historical books. In the New Testament, you have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John that tell us the story of the life, death, burial, resurrection of Jesus. And then you have Acts, which is your only historical book in the New Testament. And all the other letters fit inside the book of Acts. When you chart Paul's missionary journeys and where he writes from. And so there's a lot going on in the book of Acts. And so what I want to look at today is our verse is actually, they split this verse between our readings on the 9th and the 10th. So, I'm so sorry. But, they split verse 1 into verse A and B. So, B, and I didn't notice it, so as usual, I'm right here recording. I'm going to do 8-1. And then I noticed it's split in our reading. So, the verse says this. Saul was one of the witnesses, and he agreed completely with the killing of Stephen. A great wave of persecution began that day, sweeping over the church in Jerusalem, and all the believers, except the apostles, were scattered through the regions of Judea and Samaria. Okay, so that's the verse we're going with. And we're going to take we're only in chapter 8 of Acts. So we've been reading it past 3 days. And we're going to take a step through the books, the chapters. So the book of Acts is called the Acts of the Apostles. But it is really the Acts of the Apostles and others as prompted and empowered by the Holy Spirit. That's what's going on in the book of Acts. So if you go back to Acts, so I want you to take a look at the past couple of days' readings. And, Wendy's taking you through these. And when you look at Acts chapter 1, is Acts chapter 1 is the ascension of, the Great Commission and the ascension of Jesus. So, so I want you to put a pin right here in Acts chapter 1, verse 8. It says, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses both in Jerusalem and all Judea and Samaria and even to the remotest parts of the earth. That is the rest of the story of the book of Acts. As the Great Commission goes forth, as the gospel goes from Jerusalem to Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. And but what what we see in the book of Acts, so remember, Acts 1:8 is, chapter 1 is the Great Commission and the Ascension of Jesus. Chapter 2, exactly what Jesus said, my power will come to you. So the Holy Spirit comes and the church is born. That's Acts chapter 2. And then what you see is Acts chapters 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 is the church grows through testing. And it's this very interesting, it's a pattern if you watch it. Bad things happen, the apostles respond by preaching the gospel, and people are saved. That's what this looks like. So in Acts chapter 3 is the gate beautiful. Acts chapter 4 is as Peter and John are taken before the council. And every single one of these is the preaching of the gospel. And then chapter 5 is Ananias and Sapphira. And then Acts chapter 6 are the deacons chosen. And then Acts chapter 7 is Stephen. And I believe I did Acts chapter 7 last year about Stephen. And then we get to exactly where we are today, Acts chapter 8, verse 1. Acts chapter 8, verse 1 is the hinge verse that opens the door for the spread of the gospel into Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. So we're going to watch it march forward. But this hinge is Acts chapter 8, verse 1 is the mirror image of Acts chapter 1, verse 8. Not that I'm saying that, when originally written in the original manuscripts, chapter and verse were not there. And so it is when you say, oh, well, that's interesting, Lisa, how each chapter shows that. Well, because the chapters were added later, and it was natural divisions as we've seen the story change and what's gone forth. But Acts chapter 1 verse 8 and Acts chapter 8 verse 1 correlate greatly. So if you see that Acts chapter 8 verse 1 is the mirror image of Acts chapter 1 verse 8. So let's look back at that again. And let's see. I flipped back too far. I'm in John. 1:8 said this, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses, both in Jerusalem and all Judea and Samaria, even to the remotest parts of the earth. 8:1. Saul was a hearty agreement with putting them to death, and on that day a great persecution began against the church in Jerusalem. Remember? So we've already had this here in Jerusalem. And they were all scattered through the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles. Now, Acts 8:1 begins to answer Jesus' commission of Acts chapter 1, verse 8. This is a really good theology moment. I've had this discussion with my students about God's directive will and God's permissive will. So, God's directive will is Acts 1:8. God's permissive will is Acts 8:1. They were told to go to Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, to the ends of the earth with the gospel. They were hanging out too long in Jerusalem. So God's permissive will sends them forth. It's the story of all time of how the gospel goes forth. Persecution. That's what's happening. And that God's permissive will, the things that he allows because of the response of people, is what makes it go forth. The gospel is moving from Jerusalem to Judea to Samaria to the ends of the earth. And we'll watch it in the next reading as it moves. But then there's this other interesting thing that happens in, Oh, let's see. Hold on. I think it's in a couple of days. But I want you to go ahead and notice this verse. So go to Acts chapter 11, verse 19. Because what you have in the rest of that reading is Saul's persecuting the church, and then you have Philip, and I think you have Peter, and then you have the conversion of Saul, and then you have Cornelius' vision, and then you have the council again as Peter's reporting to Jerusalem in chapter 11. So when you get to chapter 11, in verse 19, it says this. I want you to pay attention to this. It says, so then those who were scattered because of the persecution that had occurred in connection with Stephen, so right here, what we're talking about, 8:1, made their way to Phoenicia and Cyprus, and pay attention to this city right here, to Antioch, speaking the word to no one except the Jews alone. Okay, so do you see that in chapter 11? Now, we're not there yet, but it's very much connected to this. And as we watch what Jesus said in Acts 1:8, that you will be my witnesses from Jerusalem to Judea to Samaria to the ends of the earth. And now in chapter 8, verse 1, witnesses are going from Jerusalem to Judea to Samaria, and then now to the ends of the earth. How does the ends of the earth happen? Antioch. Antioch is the key. So when we watch that the persecution, not missing that 8:1a is Saul holding their coats so they could stone and kill Stephen. As Saul, if 8:1 knew what was going to happen in chapter 9 and then in 11, because it says what directly happens is that the gospel goes forth to the city of Antioch. Pay attention to that, because Antioch is who sends out a missionary that we're meeting holding coats right here in 8:1. It's amazing. It's amazing what God does. That, and I think there's so many lessons here for us, but I think a big one for this, especially in the coming times, is to don't be surprised by persecution. Be prepared for it, because God uses it. Or if it did not work in his directive will, it would not be included in his permissive will. Don't be surprised by it. Be ready for God to use me, for God to use you, as the gospel continues to go forth to the ends of the earth. We'll see you next time on Read Through the Word.